Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we're talking about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, as well as Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Like always, if I'm talking about something that you don't want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include the time of when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So for example, if you don't want to hear what I have to say about The Flash, you can skip to what I had to say about Legends of Tomorrow or Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is this week's episode of The Flash. So a lot of things to run through. I like the metahuman that they had to go up against in this episode. His name is Clive. I'm not really sure what his moniker is, obviously, you take Barry, for example, his moniker being the Flash. I don't know what his metahuman moniker is, but I like his power. I mean, it's pretty messed up what it does to a human. It basically attacks them. It basically decays a human until they eventually turn to dust, essentially. But it's pretty cool, like, how it looks when he touches something and it, like, decays an entire building and stuff like that. Even bullets don't even work on them because the moment they come in contact with them, they automatically break apart. What I find very interesting about him is his whole motivation. It's kind of interesting because at first I was like, oh man, because at first it's like, oh, is this some kind of virus going around? I was like, oh, it's definitely, obviously got to be metahuman related. But then, like, especially when it came to the second event, I was like, wait a minute, that's the dude, Captain Mendez from Flashpoint. I was like, holy crap. Oh, it's like, wait, so are you picking people from Flashpoint? And it's like, it turns out to be the case. Apparently, basically, who he was in Flashpoint, basically, these four, Joe, as well as Mendez, as well as two other cops, ended up coming after him and putting him in jail. Like, I'm not really especially sure why. I mean, I guess it's just, he's a criminal and he got caught. He wanted to get revenge at the people who took time out of his life. It's like he was locked up for whatever amount of time. I don't know. I mean, not unless I missed something, but the way he was acting, it was almost like they kind of framed him for something or kind of jammed him up a bit of being like, oh yeah, stacking all this stuff against him. I mean, I don't know. I mean, when they arrested him, like when we kind of got to see into Flashpoint, I'll kind of get to that a little bit later on, but it kind of seemed like it was just kind of an okay collar, so, but not unless there was more to it, like I said, context that I kind of missed, but I just think that's kind of interesting that you're holding a vendetta from a timeline that no longer exists against people who have nothing to do with it. Because literally of the four people he's targeting, only one of them is a cop. One's a PI, one ran a restaurant, and the other one, Mendez in particular, was a musician. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. Because it's something that it's come up and it's kind of got my brain wondering about, like, who a person is in this timeline compared to who they were in Flashpoint. Does that overwrite who they were? Because obviously that's the whole situation with Magenta, was the fact is that her persona in Flashpoint was kind of overriding her brain here in this original timeline, so she kind of had dual personalities going at the same time. But then you take someone like the Rival, like, it seemed like he was talking more so from himself in this timeline, because he's like, oh, you took it away from me, that basically Flashpoint showed me who I could have been, but you took that away from me the moment you rewound time and created this timeline, So it begs the question of, like, how does that work? I guess it differs from person to person, because it didn't really happen with Wally at all, because with Wally, it was just kind of like, it doesn't, like, at the beginning, it was kind of like, obviously his brain was kind of overwhelmed by, Flashpoint memories kind of being in his head, but it never turned into anything. I mean, granted, who's to say it won't turn into something later on? Obviously, that whole situation's fixed, but I don't know whether his situation kind of brought that to light in my head. I'm like, maybe it's something specifically tied to alchemy. Maybe because Wally's case, Wally did it to himself. So maybe unless alchemy does it to you, like, it doesn't have the full-on effect. Maybe, I don't know, maybe there's just extenuating circumstances with Wally's case. He's a special case because he did it to himself. He didn't have alchemy do it. So maybe there's some extra steps in there that kind of shift your mindset or something. I don't know. But like overall, like I said, he's just a very interesting meta. I did like how the whole situation was dealt with at first, because the whole episode's about teaching Wally about getting faster and everything. I'll get to that in a second. But I like how, like, basically Barry was able to phase an entire train. I was like, dude, that is sick. That is amazing. And not only the train, but every passenger on it too. Everyone was clapping for him afterwards, like, oh my god, that was amazing. It's like, that was the first time he'd ever done that. Because I don't think he's ever actually phased with another person before. I mean, maybe he hasn't. I just don't remember that. But he's always obviously phased himself. That's just nothing to him now. But it's like, I don't think he's ever phased with another person before. But to go to the extent that he did, that was just... I don't even think he's ever phased an object before either. Like, I don't know. That was just overall just trial and error. Like, just amazing that he was able to do it all at once. I guess it just shows you how good Barry is at being the Flash and everything. But it also showed you how good Wally is picking up things. At first he had a little problem with it, but eventually he was able to defeat Clive because I don't know what it is. Apparently something about the speedster's blood, it kind of works in the opposite way of how Clive's power works, how it kind of breaks cells down, but for Barry and, Wally, they heal fast because there's, just how the speed force works on their cells and stuff like that. So basically it acts as a counteractive agent to Clive's power. So all Wally had to do was phase through him and, get his blood into Clive's system. And that's the only way you could touch him because, the moment you touch him, you're kind of screwed. Hence the whole Iris situation in this episode. Because that was kind of like a dire moment of just Wally trying to rush towards Iris before Clive could grab onto him. But then it's just kind of I kind of was thinking he might be able to get there faster, but he'd be able to get there in time. But sadly, he wasn't able to. I'm guessing it's kind of a situation where it's because that's kind of the thing later on. Is why didn't you call Barry? Because at this point, no matter how fast Wally is, Barry is still a little faster than him. I mean, the race at the beginning brought up an interesting thing that they are very even neck, speed wise, because that race being sick as it was, I love the fact that everyone put bets down on it. But the fact is that Wally and Barry were neck and neck the entire race until it came down to that building where Barry just phased through it. Wally had to waste a little time going up it and over it. So that's how Barry ended up taking the lead. But for most of the part, they were neck and neck. So easily at this point, Wally is just as fast as Barry. I mean, granted, you also have to say, maybe Barry wasn't pushing himself as much as he, because the fact, because you can tell when Barry's really pushing himself, because usually when he extremely pushes himself, that's usually how he ends up bursting through, time and space and end up time traveling and stuff like that, so it's stuff like that kind of has to be kept in mind. So it does beg the question, was Barry going as fast as he could? I feel like without going to the extremes, I feel like he did go as fast as he could. So that kind of shows you just how good Wally is. In fact, he's keeping up and everything. Then going to the whole Iris situation, the fact is they had to get Caitlin to kind of use her powers to kind of slow it down a little bit. But there's always the danger of when I'm losing control of my powers and everything, which leads to the whole conversation of, her actually almost losing control at one point, but Julian kind of is there to kind of pull her back because he knows more so than anyone, because, they're kind of in the same situation, being controlled by something else inside of you, him being alchemy, her being Killer Frost. Because essentially he kind of got mad at her earlier in the episode. Because basically he brought up the conversation of how you have to be responsible for your actions. You can't just be it's not my fault, because basically that's you trying to sugarcoat and trying to make yourself feel better about the fact is what your actions are, the problems that you cause and stuff like that. Which Caitlin kind of took it as so you're talking about me, the stuff I do is Killer Frost and stuff like that. And it's just more so that he's lashing out because in his mind, he looks at Caitlin as being strong because she's able to fight off being Killer Frost, even though she's crossed that boundary. She hasn't crossed it, but almost losing herself to her power, she's been able to come back. But in his case, becoming alchemy, he couldn't come back from it. Because night after night, it happened to him, and it still sits with him. Even though he seems like he's okay with it, he's moved past it, it's no, it still bothers him, because he feels like he was weak because he didn't fight back, that he succumbed to the power, and so he kind of talks Caitlin to not succumbing to her powers, and so she's able to help Iris. That's kind of an interesting thing, too, because, to me, I saw the fact that they're spending so much time together and stuff. I'm so is there going to be, a Julian and Caitlin thing? And then she kind of asked him out for, not necessarily a date, it's kind of alluding to a date, but it's go out for drinks or something like that, and Julian's yeah, sure, yeah, that'd be great. So I thought that's kind of, because I was literally thinking, I was is there possibly something there? And they kind of just answered near the end of the episode like that, so I really appreciate that. That's definitely going to be interesting going forward. Sadly, Caitlin hasn't had the best love life, because there's a whole Ronnie situation, then Jay/Hunter Zolomon situation, so not necessarily always working in her favor. So, if things kind of work out that way, then again, it's when you think about it, it's technically she's kind of falling for another bad guy to a certain extent, because it's he is technically alchemy, and we don't know if that's completely done or not with this whole Savitar situation. Who Savitar could come back and easily turn him back into alchemy, or maybe something's going to happen to trigger him to become alchemy. Which, side note, he brought up the fact is, because a big thing about this episode was the fact is dealing with the fact is that this is a lot of people died because of him. It's another, because he created Clive, turning him into the meta he is. So, as alchemy, so he kind of blames himself for those deaths and everything. And apparently there's still one more husk out there. Still one more Flashpoint meta to deal with. And that was kind of an interesting conversation about Wally's training, because Barry, tried to approach, like, this is actually Barry's first time being a mentor to another speedster. He's always had other people be his mentor. The two Wells, Jay as well as Hunter Zolomon were all kind of his mentors. And even though two of them were evil, the fact of the matter is they still helped shape him into the speedster that he is. But the fact is that Barry doesn't know how to be that for Wally, because it's like, Barry can tell Wally, it's like, oh, you're supposed to do this, you're supposed to feel this, but it's like, not everyone learns the same way. And it's like, because like, basically Barry's been like expecting too much of Wally, in a sense of like, because he sees, Wally's raw talent, he just kind of assumes that basically Wally will immediately pick it up. So the fact of the matter is, Barry had a little more time to cultivate his skills and his techniques. Plus, even Cisco said it himself, it's like, take Fake Wells, Eobard, for example, had years to prepare, like, kind of lay out a plan in his head of like, okay, this is how I'm going to help Barry get faster in these regards, so basically he can get me back to my original timeline. So, he had time to work that out. It's like, sadly, they're kind of on a clock here, so they have to deal with this as fast as possible. But seeing what Barry was able to do in that one instant, like just first time trying, able to make the train phase, that kind of made Wally phase, which is just the beginning of what he's going to teach Wally. But like I said, I'm trying to remember. I think he's used it he's used it this season. The whole lightning bolt throwing thing. I'm sure that's going to definitely be one of the things. That Barry's got under his belt that he's going to teach Wally. He's going to try and teach everything that he's picked up over all his time as a speedster to Wally, to help deal with this whole sabotage situation. So okay, breaking things down more, there was a whole situation about Joe finally finding out the truth. It's because Iris kind of broke down a little bit, because at first she was like, Barry's like, oh, maybe we should tell your dad, and she's like, no, we shouldn't, we can't tell Dad. The fact of the matter is, she's like, things with him and Cecile are going well. She's bringing her daughter Joni over to like meet everybody and everything. So it's kind of like, no, Dad's happy. And it's like, if, things are going well, he's in a relationship and everything is happy. And it's like, if I tell him the truth, he's also going to be focused on me and not living his life and everything. So she doesn't want that. She doesn't want to jeopardize his happiness, which I'll kind of get to that in a second. But Joe was super pissed when Iris finally broke it in the news, because she's worried and everything, because she's like, because her dad's like, the fact is, we faced plenty of bad guys before. It's like, how's it say this guy won't be any different? It's like, well, he's coming after you specifically, and he has a power at that point in time. It's like, no one knows exactly how to deal with. So, because even Barry and Wally can't fight him, because the fact is, they can't touch him. It's going to be pretty hard to kind of deal with him in that regard. But then, she kind of spilled the beans, because it's like, she's worried about her dad's death, and it's like, because life is it's like I said, it put life in a lot more perspective for her, because she's scared, because the whole Luigi restaurant situation, that was another thing. Like, Luigi's supposed to go through a name change, and it's like, oh, that's on the board of like something from the future, and it's like, for her, it just kind of, it scares her for a moment, because like, man, that means things aren't changing. The only thing so far that we know of that they've even mentioned about changing is the whole plunder situation of like making it so that it was Wally who took him in rather than Barry. So that's one thing that's changed, but we don't really know how the rest of the timeline has kind of shifted, like whether anything else really has changed, like how much might have changed, whether it's big things or small things, and just how much is going to stay the same. And this Luigi's situation seems like it might be the same, as well as what we end up finding out at the end of the episode, but I'll get to that later as well. So she's super freaked out and everything, and Joe obviously gets super pissed, which he has the right to. It's like, you shouldn't have kept this from me, which they shouldn't have. The whole point is to not keep secrets anymore, because you're at your weakest when you keep secrets, because you're not working together at your fullest strength with everyone participating, Because even though Joe may not be the smartest, but he may be able to think about certain things. He might be able to, it's like, you're not playing at your fullest strength. You're at their fullest when they're all working together. And that's kind of the point that is to get across. So he was pissed, but more so than anything, he was pissed at Barry, because it's like, how much Iris means to me. I know you care about her and everything, and I know your reasonings for doing what you're doing, but the fact is, my little girl means the world to me. You know that more than anyone else, because you grew up under that same household. So you know that something like this is unacceptable. But things are good between them. It's like, no more secrets. keeping that. It's like, we're going to stick this together. We're going to figure this all out. So. But kind of going back to the whole Joni situation, I love that whole conversation of just like, okay, she's like, it's like, well, so Joni, so what do you miss about Central Station? It's like, well, if I had to pick one thing, it'd be Kid Flash, and you have Wally like, oh, you like Kid Flash? She's like, oh yeah, he's amazing. And Sarah's like, oh yeah, go on, tell me all the good things you like about Kid Flash, and everyone's just laughing there. He's like, really? Oh, Kid Flash is the real hero. You even have Barry being like, really? And you have Wally like, come on, Barry, don't kind of be talking like that. Kid Flash is amazing. She knows it. And then Cecile's like, well, come points out the fact that she's more of a Team Flash type of person. So, and then they even put Joe in the middle. It's like, oh yeah, Joe is actually pretty tight with Kid Flash. And they're like, oh yeah. And then she's just like, so, I mean, if you had to pick one between Flash and Kid Flash, she's like, I mean, I wouldn't, because they're both amazing. They're both heroes and everything. I wouldn't choose. She's like, oh, but if you had to, and you see Wally like, almost like, come on, Dad, you gotta pick me. And just like putting him in that awkward situation, he's just kind of like, I'm not answering this damn question. Because even in that situation, even at during the whole bet situation, he was the only one that was saying like, yeah, I'm not going to bet. Both my sons are superheroes and let them do their thing. It's like, I'm not going to bet because that's the safest bet in his own son, right? So he doesn't seem like he's choosing sides. That's because that's going to complicate things. And once again, it's one of, yes, it'll probably get him in trouble in the future and everything. I mean, it kind of got him in trouble in Flashpoint. But that's what I love about Wally, is the fact that he's very arrogant a little bit. Because it's to be expected. It's like, you found out, like, oh man, in a different timeline, you were a speedster. You always kind of felt like there was something a little bit more. But then, now you've got that power and everything. And now you feel just different. And it's kind of cool. I just love him. Like, he's like a little, he acts like a little kid would getting superpowers. I mean, it's not just a little kid, anyone would, but the way he acts about it, it's I don't know, it's very interesting to me. I mean, because it's not something solely to him. Like, all superheroes, you get to write certain superheroes at some point in their lives got cocky because they were just like, oh man, I'm on top of the world type of thing, so. And another note I want to make is I thought it was kind of interesting, the whole, like, vibing Flashpoint. Now, Flashpoint doesn't exist anymore because that timeline disappears, but essentially they allude to basically traveling to kind of an alternate universe, not like a different world, like an Earth 2 or Earth 3 situation, kind of like a divergent universe from Earth 1. They're basically a universe where Barry stayed in Flashpoint, which is like, it's just a little thing that they did, and this is all that was kind of interesting, because kind of wondering how they were going to do that. It's like, I was like, oh, you're going to, and it's like, and they brought up the fact is it no longer exists. I was like, oh, all right, that doesn't exist anymore, does it? But it's like, it does exist on a different universe, which does beg the question, will that come up in the future or not? I kind of get the feeling like it might be, or maybe it's just kind of like a one-off thing, but I feel like we're establishing exactly what Cisco can do, and he can do something like that, kind of crossover, not just into another Earth, but kind of another universe, kind of another, I don't know how to properly phrase it. Like, I'm sure there's a very good scientific way of explaining it to me, but to me, it's like an alternate universe is the furthest I can go. But to me, it's like when you consider the whole, like, traveling dimensions and alternate Earths type of thing, using the term alternate universe could also apply to the different Earths and everything. So that's where I'm like, I don't know the right word. I'm sure they said it in the show, but I didn't quite catch it because a lot of science, even science fiction, kind of goes over my head. So it's kind of like a situation of like, I don't know the proper term to describe what I'm trying to, describe about what happened. So. And then the final thing we got at the end of the episode, kind of trailing back to like, oh, things playing out the way they are. Jessie shows up and she brings up the fact is that, well, her dad's been taken by Gorilla Grodd and he's taken him to Gorilla City, which is kind of the whole gorilla attack situation, which many things I want to bring up. So the fact is that happened. Remember, that happens on Earth 1 because that's what the news was reporting. So that means the battle trails back to Earth 1 because we know it's on a different Earth or whatever, because that's where Grodd got sent the last time we dealt with him back in season 2. He ended up getting shipped away like that. So next episode is going to be very interesting because Jesse's going to learn about Wally being a speedster, and this might be the episode where we get 3 speedsters going all at once. Because there was a battle with Savitar, but that was them kind of working separately. This will be them, all 3 of them working together, and it's going to be amazing. It kind of trails back to the point I was making earlier too, that, Barry, now, because I didn't even think about it, like, Barry didn't even have to train Jesse. Jesse kind of picked things up. I mean, I'm sure Barry gave her some pointers and stuff like that, but it's just kind of like she handled things on her own. Makes you wonder if it's going to be I don't know, like, because she's been away from a little while. She's probably been working on her speed too. It's like, makes you wonder what she's capable of, what she's been up to. I just know next episode is going to be sick. It's like, Gorilla City, because there's multiple Grods. I mean, other gorillas like Grodd. So it's going to be interesting seeing him and a whole bunch of others teaming up. I mean, I'm just curious to see how it all plays out, especially because I wonder will Caitlyn be of help in this situation, because she was the last one that, like, she was the one that was able to kind of reason with Grodd, kind of talk to him. So, but I really hope we get that 3 speedsters moment. We haven't really had major speedster team ups. I mean, more so than anything, we've seen a lot of Barry and Wally teaming up, which fills me with so much. It's like, dude, it's amazing. But just imagine, we still have 2 other speedsters. We could, obviously Jesse next episode, but we could also add Jay to the mix too. And it's like, someone had recently asked me the question too about, will we kind of get Impulse in this? And I was like I said, since we're dealing with the whole future situation, like, to me, I'm like, maybe he could be like a season finale type of thing. I mean, I feel like this is the prime time to make him pop up, is because we're dealing with the future. But that's just kind of wishful thinking. It's just like, because, for the creators of the show, it might be a little too much too soon. It's like they probably have to build up to it, kind of let things build out a little bit more, and then introduce Impulse. It's just kind of how the way things have to work. But nevertheless, overall, very good episode. The next episode will not be until February 21st, which I'm a little disappointed about, but I can live with waiting a little bit, because I'm super excited to see what goes down next episode. And now moving on to this week's episode of Legends of Tomorrow. This episode dealt heavily with the fact that the team had to go back to 1776 because Rip, as the last episode showed, Rip went back in time. Obviously, because he's with the Legends now, because they messed, not under the Legion now, because they messed with his head and everything, which even Rip himself refers to them as a Legion. Maybe they don't expressly label themselves as a Legion of Doom. Maybe that's something specific the Legends called them, but maybe them being the Legion is something they're like, oh yeah, call us the Legion type of thing. I don't know. They never really used that name. It never came up once last episode, but maybe it's just something that they themselves have decided, oh, we'll kind of stick with. It's just kind of an interesting thing that now it's kind of caught on, because the only person that really wasn't okay with it was Sarah being like, I'm not calling them the Legion of Doom. It's like, now they're calling themselves Legion. I mean, like I said, the whole of Doom aspect, probably something specifically tied to the Legends that, the Legion themselves. I know I keep saying that back and forth, and that's definitely going to get confused. So I'm going to stop right now. But nevertheless, Rip had killed George Washington. Basically, the whole thing was a trap to draw into Legends. Now, a quick thing about Rip I found very fascinating. I was wondering what they were going to do about the whole memory situation. All his memories are obviously intact, but a lot of the different connections are gone. Like, for example, he feels nothing towards Sarah. Shown in the fact is that he shot her without hesitation. And even, like, later on, Jackson's like, yo, Rip, it's Sarah, because obviously Sarah and Rip kind of had a little bit of a special bond. I mean, out of anyone, they were the 2 closest people on the Wave Rider, just because it was like, anytime there was a situation going down, he'd always kind of confide in Sarah. But like I said, there was also seemed like there might have been something there, which also begs up the question, well, there was also something between her and Snart too, possibly. So that situation. But the fact is, he looked at her and was like, oh, is she supposed to mean something to me? And it snaps her neck like it was nothing. It was like, holy crap. And it, like, I feel like being a good guy actually fits him well too, because it's just like, because there's that side of you just kind of like, the team is like, no, that's Rip, we can't do anything, especially Jax, because Jax didn't want to fight him, because it's like, yo, that's Rip, I don't want to hurt you or anything. He's like even trying to talk to him and everything, but that kind of all changes when the perspective is like, yo, he sees him outright kill Sarah, quote unquote kill Sarah. Luckily they were able to get the Wave Rider / Gideon systems back online so they could heal her and everything. But Jax was chasing after him, was going to kill him, because it was just, he was so enraged by what Rip had done. And it was kind of like I said, it wasn't just an interesting side of seeing Rip, we also got to see that side of Jax too, because we saw the side of him, like, because so far we've never actually ever seen Jax get that mad or upset before. Like, he's been mad and he's been upset, but never to that extent, that crossing a boundary that he normally would himself. Like, I mean, overall, this is a fantastic episode, because obviously you had Sarah out most of the episode suffering from a gunshot wound. You had Martin dealing with that, trying to help her. The fact is that Jax and Martin couldn't combine together to become Firestorm because of, like, the EMP device he used that basically messed up Ray's suit so that basically he was stuck miniature size. You had obviously, like I said, their splicer device that lets them combine messed up. I said Gideon kind of being offline and everything. It's just kind of the legends are at a very vulnerable state because they're up against someone who knows them all too well. Because that's something I didn't even think about at the time. It's like, of course he know how to hit them hard. He knows their strengths and their weaknesses because he spent so much time with him. I mean, especially because he knows their history so well, because he's the one that picked out the team. So he automatically knew their strengths and their weaknesses. Obviously the team was built at the beginning just to be kind of fodder for trying, they'd had the least impact on the timeline. So he needed them to come along so that they could help him get his family back. But even then, it's still something he learned all he could about them, just to know the things he knows about them. The fact is they wouldn't affect timelines, but the fact is he knows their weaknesses inside and out like that. And also the fact is that he didn't even care about his family, because to him, he feels like this version of him right now is a version of him he should have been. Like, he's like, this is the me that I should have always been, but I was always bound by the fact that it's like, oh, I couldn't save my family, boo-hoo. Oh, these pathetic people I keep around me, this ragtag team of people that are just nothing. The scum that I kind of brought along with me, essentially. Obviously, he didn't use such heavy words as scum, but essentially being, the obviously the reason why he brought them along is because they weren't anyone special or anything special. He even tries to turn things on Jax by even going like, oh yeah, you realize what the Spear of Destiny can do, right? It can change your life too, in a sense of like, your dad could still be alive. Because it's like, because it makes you wonder, what is his motivation for this? Obviously, you would think the original Rip, obviously his motivation would be able to get his family back. But as you can see, this Rip, that's not what he cares about. So it's like, what benefit would you get working with the Legion? Obviously, they've messed with his head to the point that obviously he thinks that he's kind of a better fit with them. Because like I say, it seems like more so than anything what they did was, obviously the memories are still intact, but they probably got rid of some of the memories that meant something. Like those special moments he spent with Sarah that kind of gave them their bonds. Like it's there, but those parts of his brain, it's like almost like the synapses there are cut, that would connect these certain memories to emotional things and stuff like that. So it seems like that's why he's that sympathetic and empathetic side of him is just completely gone. So it was just kind of very interesting to me just to see Rip like that. I like the fact is that we got a little bit of like Ray kind of being in the ventilation, obviously trying to get to the, kind of kicking the backup power for Gideon and stuff like that, and running from that rat. And I just love that little situation. It kind of reminded me, and I don't know if they meant to do this on purpose, it kind of reminds me of the little taste we got at the beginning of the season when everyone kind of got scattered to different timelines, when Rip kind of sent everyone everywhere. That, Ray was dealing with the whole dinosaur situation, surviving and everything. It seemed like it might be kind of reflective of that, kind of back in that situation. He didn't even reference it, but that's what I was kind of getting the feeling that it might be aimed to. I also love Mick's whole side story in this whole situation of how, like, he's spending so much time with Washington, because at the beginning he admits, he's like, I don't like Washington. He's not that special. I mean, is he really that special? He's on a $1 bill. Obviously, he couldn't have been that great. But then it's a situation where he actually spent time with Washington, and he points out the fact that, Washington, you're a punk. You want to surrender. You're like, oh, the code of conduct of like, oh yeah, this part of like the America he's trying to build and everything of like, oh yeah, that, like, oh, I'm a, when there are guidelines to the art of war that basically you follow, that you basically have to treat your enemy, even when you have them captured, with respect and dignity, that you don't treat them like inhumane, like essentially inhumane, I guess would be kind of the word I'd use. Because basically it's like, oh, you did that, I do that for your men, you should do the same thing for me. But then you have Rory being like, basically adding his own mentality to it. Like, the fact of the matter is, the America you want doesn't work the way you are. Like, the fact is, if we need to, we'll play dirty. Like, the enemy wants to go high, we will go low, essentially, is kind of what he's getting at. The fact is that if the enemy has a plan of attack, well, we kind of screw up their plan by sneaking and attacking them. We kind of play the low ball if we need to, because it's just got, America isn't all about dignity and everything. It's like when it needs to get down to it, we can get very scrappy. More so than anything. I mean, I guess in the essence of everything, it's like, I guess you could look at America like that if you really break it down, like to a very simplified. I mean, there's a lot more complexity and nuances to it, but if you get down to the bare bones, I guess you could look at it like that. I mean, it's sad to say, because even more, they even talk about it that basically, because even Washington later on says it, that basically Mick is literally the ideal of what he's trying to build. He wants kind of America to essentially be. So technically, Rory makes it so that, oh yeah, America's kind of supposed to be he's supposed to be a reflection of what America is, kind of what they dream it to be. And it's just kind of like, wait, what? Even a point later on, you end up finding out that there's a statue dedicated to him in DC now in the present timeline and everything. And it was kind of cool seeing him and George Washington kind of kick ass together, because it's like, yo, Washington can hold his own. They were fighting those dudes off by themselves. So that was pretty impressive. I just like that. It's always interesting seeing Nick becoming friends with other people, even kind of going like giving a bear hug type of situation. Another element that popped up in this episode that kind of took me by surprise was the whole Nate and Amaya situation. Like, obviously, it seemed like there was a little bit there at the beginning when they're cooking and everything and just talking, and, it's just like, oh, getting close and everything, and especially when the ship shakes a little bit and they grab each other, and it's like, whoa, wait, oh, whoa. So that was interesting. But then they spent more time together and everything, basically talking about the difference between dating in her time versus dating in their time. Brings up the fact that because basically he makes a reference to The Wizard of Oz, and she's like, oh yeah, I've seen that movie. And she brings up the fact that she was on a date. So he's like, oh, you had a life before X and everything. So that's kind of cool. He's like, tell me about it. I think she talked about it being a guy named Bob, but essentially their date kind of got interrupted because it was like, at that time, was it Poland that, Hitler had invaded, and then Nate was trying, oh man, Hitler, man, he ruins everything. Just, he sucks, right? Just because she never actually got to see the end of The Wizard of Oz was kind of sad, and especially kind of ruined the date and everything. But essentially, they spend time together, and basically, obviously, they get attacked by some Hessians, and basically, Nate rolls off the cliff, and Amaya uses her power, dolphins it up, and is able to save him and everything. But because she used the dolphin power, she doesn't have to necessarily worry about it. Like him, he's kind of shivering, kind of going through hypothermia. She's trying to keep him warm and everything. She's like, okay, we're going to have to do skin-to-skin action. And he's like, to keep warmth. The way I said it like that, that could easily be an innuendo. But basically, it's like, I wasn't expecting this. This isn't the way I thought I'd get you out of your clothes. She's like, you were thinking about getting me out of my clothes? It's like, yeah. And they're hugging and everything. The fact is that they kind of like, shack up together like that, because the whole point that, Nate had got across with the fact is that dating in their time was kind of chill. There's no expectations. In her time, it's like, oh, if someone is dating you, it's more so courtship. That basically dating at that time meant, it's like, oh, you're getting together with this person because you plan to marry them and be with them for the rest of your life. It's like dating's not like that. You kind of test the feel, see how you feel about someone. It doesn't have to immediately turn into something as serious as marriage, because obviously you take relationships where people have been together for years before they even get married. But it's like you take somewhere like her time, it's like you get acquainted to someone, and it's like you're expected to get married. Obviously, you take situations where it's like back then, I'm sure the life expectancy was a little shorter than what it is nowadays. So that's something that has to be brought up in question and stuff like that. But it does seem like it's a situation where it's like, yo, we had fun, right? Let's keep it chill. And, he's like, yeah, I'm the chillest chill. Like, this gift that he's given her isn't of any, like, sentimental value, even though it kind of had its own sentimental value to it, because the gift ended up being, like, ruby slippers. So I'm curious to see whether there's going to be more to that, because she brings up the fact is that, oh yeah, colleagues shouldn't fraternize. It's like, well, really? Let's not forget about you and Rex. But then, to be fair, her and Rex were going to leave the Justice Society, so I guess that's okay. But it's like, obviously you were dating beforehand, but I get the situation, because it's like, you shouldn't date someone you work with, because it complicates things, especially out in the field, because you won't be thinking objectively, you'll be thinking from the heart, you get all emotional and everything, and that means jeopardizing your mission type of thing. So I get that mentality. Because I was pretty sure one thing that would kind of be holding her back is the whole Rex situation, because our main motivation for going on this whole adventure is to essentially get revenge for what Eobard did. It kind of brings up something else too, now that you're thinking about it. Like, the fact of the matter is the Spear of Destiny could be used by multiple people throughout everything. Technically, if you think about it, Martin could technically use it as a means of making his daughter's existence, Lily, make it so that her existence is no longer an anomaly, that basically she's just kind of a natural part of the timeline now. Jax could get his dad back, that technically Sarah could get Laurel back, and then obviously Amaya could get Rex back. So it's like, there's so many levels of like, oh, people could technically use the Spear of Destiny for a lot. Whether they will or not, I don't know. There are legends. They're here to protect the timeline and stuff like that. And it is kind of sad of the situation where it's like you're here trying to protect the timeline and everything when you have other people. You take the Legion, for example, trying to basically destroy the timeline. The whole point of the Spear is to rewrite history. Well, not history, just reality in general. But the fact of the matter is we don't know what kind of ramifications that will have in the long run. Like what that would do. Like, will that mean like tearing? Like I'm sure it will kind of slowly but surely, like the more the Spear of Destiny is used, will slowly tear and destroy the fabric of space and time. I mean, obviously, this is all going to. I mean, hopefully, it all ends with it kind of in the Legend's favor. I was about to say Legion once again. I don't know. Like, that's just definitely going to be confusing going forward. If I'm going to say their name, I'm going to have to like say going like a lot going forward, especially when the whole TV show Legion actually airing tomorrow. Obviously tomorrow at the time of me recording this, but still, that's just definitely going to get confusion if I keep saying that. So I'm gonna have to say the full title of Legion of Doom. So, but overall, very good episode. I like the way, like I said, it was just kind of like a very pulled back episode because it wasn't even an episode like, oh man, we got superpowers all over. It's like, no, a very grounded episode where you just had Jax kind of being the one to kind of have to deal with things. I mean, especially because he kind of had to take the captain position because it's like, like the most skilled person that doesn't have powers is Sarah, but she was kind of out of commission, and everyone else that kind of had powers was off somewhere else. The more bruisers of the group, I guess you could arguably say, because it's like, you take Jax, for example, he is just the engineer of the group, and it's like he had the responsibility of being the captain, and it just, to him, this is kind of his first time at it, but the torch kind of got passed to him, to Sarah, because she feels like obviously out of everyone, he's kind of the more capable, because I mean it helped him out in the long run was because he knows the Wave Rider in and out. He was able to kind of set up traps and everything and catch some of the guys off guard and even kind of keep even Rip at bay, even knowing the place like Rip did, like Jax knew it a little better. He kind of got acquainted to it and everything. So, and there was kind of another note too. The fact of the matter is, and I love that about Gideon. It's something that popped up a lot of episodes, but I don't take the time to kind of acknowledge it. The fact is that Gideon is very sarcastic. Like the fact that, well, not necessarily sarcastic, but a lot of things she says could be seen as sarcastic, but she means it literally. It's like, oh, the fact is she's got to look through all that data that basically, excuse me, Lily had put together when she combined that device with Gideon's system. It's like tons and tons of tons and tons and tons and tons of stuff she has to look through. And she's like, well, basically, I'll make things run faster if I basically take away the life support systems and basically make it so that you guys can't breathe and everything. And then, it's like, Sarah's like, oh, you're funny, Gideon. I like that. And she's like, I wasn't joking. I'm being serious. It would go a lot faster if I just did that. And then even later on, he's like, Martin's like, okay, with Sarah's current situation. And Gideon's like, she's dead. And he's like, yes, I wouldn't have put it necessarily as bluntly, but yes, you get the grand gist of this whole situation. Which I thought that was kind of interesting that they were able to bring Sarah back. Because I wasn't expecting him to like snap her neck like that. I kind of quickly went over it earlier, but it's like, I thought it was going to be a situation like someone came up behind him, like, I don't know, somehow Ray got his suit back online and ended up knocking him out or something like that. But it's like, or someone jumped in. But I expected something happened. It's like, nope, snapped her neck. And it's like, nope, she's okay because they were able to get to her in time before brain function. It's like, wow, that whole medical system is very, very good. Not only did it help with a bullet wound, which the bullet wound had already been taken care of to a small extent by Martin, but more so than anything, it fixed a broken neck. That is amazing. So overall, though, I do like the end of the episode where it's like, no matter how much they fight, because, Sarah kind of brings the morale up. It's like, no matter how much they fight, they are a family, and that they have something that the Legion doesn't have. And that's like, that they are a family, that they work together. I mean, even the Legion just started working together last episode. So they're still a work in progress. But the fact is that even though they're tough guys individual, they're not very good at working together. This team that's dysfunctional and is crazy and is weird and kind of being the quote-unquote idiots that Eobard labels them as, they still do a good job at things. I mean, granted, they kind of screw things up a little bit, but, in the words of Mick, they are misfits, essentially. And it's a word I've used in the past to describe them as well, but, even then it works in their favor because that's what makes them, that's their way of working, that's how they gel together, so. Like I said, overall, a very good episode. Much like The Flash, we won't be seeing a new episode until February 21st. Lotus said, like I said, much like Flash, I'm sad to hear that, but I am super excited to see where we go next episode. Like I said, the Legion has another piece of the Spear of Destiny. It's not complete, so it's going to be interesting to find out where exactly all these other pieces are. Because obviously we're probably not just going to be dealing with the Legion. There's probably going to be other time anomalies, probably stuff that the Legion sets up that the Legends have to deal with, and trying to catch up with the Legion. So it's going to be interesting to see how things play out there. So, and now moving on to this week's episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So obviously the big part of this episode, well, it's kind of a split down the middle, but a big part of this episode is about Coulson trying to get May back. And the fact of the matter is, upon trying to get May back, they ended up stumbling upon the fact is that Aida isn't kind of just, her model isn't made out of nowhere. That she's actually based on a woman named Agnes. About, this person is someone that had a close connection with Radcliffe in the past. The fact is, it was a bit of a relationship, but for her, she kind of took second place to his work, essentially, because for Radcliffe, the only thing he couldn't stand was failure, and she and her, in a sense, was a failure, is kind of at least how she saw herself, because she has what essentially is a brain tumor that even he couldn't fix. And that basically, he kind of left her behind and everything, and she just kind of wants to live the rest of her life in peace. But Coulson's here trying to pull her back in and like, yo, help me, with this whole Radcliffe situation. I need you to get in contact with him, essentially. But she's like, no, just leave me alone. And Coulson's like, you know what? If I have to, I'm going to have to force her. And then Mac's like, you don't want to do that. She just wants the rest of her life in peace. But for him, he's like, no, but what about May? He's like, but what about the whole conversation about May not wanting you to do anything reckless? He even brings it up himself, the whole point of like, he's like, oh yeah, this ain't gonna be a situation where I bring a deadly alien from another universe and cross it over in 2 hours, essentially bringing up the whole Hive situation. Because that whole situation was something based out of emotion. Because he was so filled with anger about, what Ward did. He killed Ward, and that led to, Hive having a host to come back to this world with. And basically, that's what Mac was trying to say. Like, yo, be careful what you're doing, because you're fueled by emotions right now. You're pissed, you're upset, you're worried about, May and everything. And I get that. I understand it. But don't let that drive you to do something crazy, because there will be ramifications. It's like, you've literally just said what had happened in the past because you let your emotions get the best of you. And it's like, obviously, it may not exactly work out that way, but the outcome could be just as easily just as catastrophic. So kind of think before you leave. Which he talks to Agnes, and he gets her to understand that, like, the fact is the reason why he's doing this. I was like, I'm surprised you didn't really do that. You should have opened with that, but more so than anything, it's just the fact is that she was unwilling to work with him, and it's just like, no, I understand, but the fact is we need to catch Radcliffe. I need your help with this whole situation. But the fact is, if he had opened with the whole May situation, because even he's like, I came over here, had this whole speech about how I was going to force you to do this and everything, but he's like, you know what? I took the time to, like, I need to take a step back and then tell you the reason why I'm doing this, and tell her it's for May, so that he cares about was taken from him. And even acknowledges the fact is that her, Agnes and May kind of have very similar personalities. They're very strong women, and that he understands that how she wants to stay away from Radcliffe and everything. That she even points out the whole thing about Radcliffe not necessarily being a bad guy. The fact is that all he cares about is helping, and he might be kind of a mad genius in certain aspects and everything, but the fact of the matter is all he does want to do is help people. But at the same time, feel as like there's a whole situation about something basically made him go a little crazy. Obviously referencing the Darkhold, but basically witnessing it kind of got inside of his head. And like, even if he had the purest of intentions, which it seems like from the very beginning he did, but it wasn't until he read the Darkhold that his mind got a little bit more warped, turning him more into the mad scientist type. She wanted to help him, get made. She wanted to help, get in contact with Radcliffe so that, he could get May back. And at first she was kind of like, oh, there's no way he's going to show, because she knows him down to a T, because she knew he wouldn't actually show up face to face, because they're like, oh, confrontation is not Radcliffe's thing. It turns out though, they had the conversation and she's willing to like, oh, no, I'm not going, she was willing to work with them. She's even there, like, still on the phone, kind of listening through the comm and everything to let them know, like, hey, stay online so that he can basically follow her and get to him. But he says something that kind of catches her off guard. Is kind of what I'm trying to say. I'm stumbling on my words. I do apologize. And it's the fact is that he apologizes for not being there. Like, the fact is he just up and disappeared. But that's because of the nature of the fact is he didn't come up with a cure. Like, this entire time he's been working on a cure, which in the back of my brain, I'm like, oh, are you planning on implanting her brain into Ida's body? That's why you made Ida specifically after her? Is like because you want her to have her original body but have her mind? Which to obviously that's not it exactly. But to a slight degree, that's kind of true, like wanting to download her brain, essentially. Not necessarily put it, but is in fact download. But essentially, the framework is what he's been working on. It's not even necessarily Aida. Aida and stuff was just kind of the beginning. And I feel like now that they've kind of fallen to the wayside, that now the most important thing for him is the framework. Because basically, he's seen how it works with May, and it seems like at the end of the day, that's what he originally wanted. He wanted a way to basically make it so that she could survive. And it's like with the framework, her brain and mind can be downloaded in a place. Essentially, what it's supposed to be is kind of a paradise. It's kind of supposed to be kind of like a heaven of sorts, a manufactured heaven. That basically you live out a peaceful, perfect life and not have to worry about anything. A world created for you that you can live out whatever way you want to. Hence is why they're able to keep May as calm like she is now rather than before, because before the framework wasn't built in a way that it could keep her, because she'd always kind of slip through and kind of see through the seams of the world. So, but obviously now they've kind of got her more in line, which Agnes, you know, obviously she has her problems with Radcliffe, but hearing him say what he said kind of got to her, because it's like she's running out of time anyway. So it's like, what love does she have to, you know, to lose? It's like, you know, things aren't looking good in her favor, and you know she was ticking down to her final day, so she's like, why not take this chance, especially if he's kind of worked on it. And so he hooks her up to the machine and everything, and obviously her body dies at the end. And that's kind of the conversation, because I was wondering, I was like, okay, so her brain is downloaded and everything, so what does that mean for her body? But that was quickly answered after the commercial break, like her body dies. The body will eventually give out after all, like the whole circumstances, but he's like, all that matters is Agnes is part of the framework now, so this is just flesh and blood. It means nothing, which means May's going to eventually run out of time too. Because I was wondering, like, could it be that May's brain was completely down? Because that was a question, like, what is he going to do with May when it's all said and done? Obviously, obviously he needed to keep her out of the way, but she also proved to be a perfect test subject for the framework, so that's kind of why he's still keeping her and everything, because I'm sure, like, basically taking what he's, you know, he was able to finalize the framework because of May's participation, and you're just going in there to see her world and everything, see how everything works, and see that everything is perfect. Made it okay. It made it the perfect time to kind of bring Agnes in, so that does mean that they are running low on time. They need to get to May before it is too late, before her mind is stuck there, and then her body shuts down, which does beg the question, like, what are they going to do about the LMD May? Like I said, the last time we saw it, they kept her. Obviously they burned the other LMDs, but needed to keep her just because, like I said, because just in case something did happen to May, that there's some reminder there, but also because she's a reminder for him to hurry up and get the real May. What I found very fascinating is LMD, Ida. I don't know why I was kind of about to go call her LMD Agnes, but it's like, no, just call her Ida. Her reaction when she found out, like, oh, I'm actually based on someone, I'm not unique. And I was like, really? That's an interesting reaction to that whole situation, finding out that basically her design isn't unique, that basically she's based on someone else. And especially because that person was someone important to Radcliffe, it makes it even more fascinating. And even at the end, when she kind of, like, when Radcliffe walks away, she takes the necklace off Agnes's body and kind of puts it on herself. So it seems like, because it seems like lately, like, Radcliffe kind of treats her as nothing more than a machine, doesn't treat her as like, oh, this glorious masterpiece that he treated her as before, because he had great plans for her. But it seems like that's all kind of fell to the wayside, especially around the other watchdogs and stuff like that. Like, oh, could you get that thing out of here? Does that thing have to be around here? He's like, no. And then Ida looks at him like, really? Like, you're saying that's okay? Even in that context, it's almost like he was referring to her as a thing too. So I'm thinking, like, maybe we'll see going forward Ida trying to be more like Agnes to get Radcliffe's attention, because it seems like that was kind of something I alluded to before, was the fact of her wanting to become more human, and it seems like that might be the case, because the fact of the matter is, like, Radcliffe made a comment about wanting to keep Aida out of the uncanny valley, that basically that thing where robots and stuff get too realistic, that it kind of like looks a little weird, and it gives people that instant kind of type of feeling. It's like, obviously Ida's not like that, because it's like, obviously the way she's designed and everything, she looks just like a normal human being, so you never have to worry about necessarily the uncanny valley. But I'm thinking, like, it's to the point that Ida wants to be more. It's just like the LMD May, like, because it doesn't seem necessarily that, well, no, because this Ida isn't built like the Radcliffe or the May, with the whole, like, memories being downloaded, it's one thing, but it's like they also had personalities and stuff like that. So it does beg the question of, like, maybe, obviously, their main power sources were their brains, but also maybe that helped them be a little bit more than what they were. Like, for example, you take LMD May, the fact is that she was so open about her feelings towards Coulson. Yes, that was based on May because those were already within May, and it just took like circumstances and programming. I'm sure that Radcliffe very tactively used to basically make her very more emotional to kind of be in an emotional state to kind of put Coulson in an emotional state to kind of let down his guard essentially. So I don't know. It's just going to be fascinating to see how that kind of plays out. And on the other side of things, I have to clarify something. It didn't click in my head. I thought he was just kind of muscle. Did not realize that Anton himself is the superior. But essentially, he looks into the Darkhold himself for a tiny bit peek. But he does realize that basically the one that's going to help him with his whole situation of trying to wipe out all Inhumans is going to be Radcliffe. And basically, Radcliffe made Terrigen crystals, essentially. And obviously, the Terrigen crystals will basically turn anyone, obviously, normal human being, they won't work on. But the moment they get it in the hands of someone who has the DNA sequence that will allow them, to become an Inhuman, it will activate. Now, obviously, he sends his guy, Tucker, learned his name in this episode, sent him out to Senator Nadir's office. And because basically the conversation is like, oh, use it on her because the fact is her brother was an Inhuman. Like, we don't necessarily know how this all works, but that same blood DNA that was in him is in her too. So there's a good chance that she might be one. And basically, he smashes the crystal. And it's like, oh man, it's going to work on Nadir, isn't it? It's like, oh, but it doesn't. It actually works on Tucker. Because they ended up having this whole conversation of basically, oh, how disgusting and despicable Inhumans are, just how disgusting their type are and everything. Because even she's taking offense, like, oh, you think I'm going to become one? I'm not going to become one of those monsters. Don't make me laugh. And it's like, at the end of the day, she didn't become one. He's the one who became one. And at that moment, she started laughing and everything. And that is until he exploded and ended up killing her. Did not see that coming because even Daisy didn't see it coming because she's like, oh my god, this whole her office blowing up thing, obviously she faked it. She just wants to give Inhumans a bad rap. And it's like, oh yeah, one of the bodies discovered has been identified as Nadir's. And even Daisy was like, okay, I'm not going to pretend like I'm sad about it. I mean, I'm sure you're not. I mean, she did try to kill you and everything. But for Mace, it's kind of like, well, he wanted to go things the proper channel because it make her come to justice. It's kind of a Boy Scout. He's kind of like, obviously, very by the books, kind of very Captain America like. But that, like, it took me by surprise. I thought she was going to be a big adversary, especially with the whole like investigating into S.H.I.E.L.D. It does make you wonder where will that go now that she's kind of been removed from the equation. Now, I mean, who's going to take her place as kind of being the senator that kind of handles things? Like, who's going to be next in line to kind of fill that role? And will that person filling that role feel the same way about S.H.I.E.L.D. as well as Inhumans the way she did? Because obviously she's going after them hard because it's for her own way of trying to shut down S.H.I.E.L.D. and like shut down all Inhumans. Because her whole, obviously she's working with the Watchdogs and everything. And it's so interesting because it's like after all her planning and all her manipulating and stuff like that, it ends like that for her. Granted, we don't 100% know that it ended. I mean, obviously they've got her body, but maybe they faked it. Maybe they say like, oh, she died, but really she's still alive. Because I was expecting more because obviously her brother's not dead and her brother's going to pop back up. It's going to be interesting to find out when her brother comes back and it's like, oh yeah, my sister tried to kill me. It's like, I am pissed at her, but now I found out she's dead now. And also the fact is that what makes it even, like, the irony behind it, like, such disgust with Inhumans that basically everything, because the whole point was to kind of turn her into an Inhuman because they wanted to use an Inhuman as bait. And it kind of worked out in the end because Tucker ended up becoming one. I like what he did, though. He went back to base, pretending like nothing was wrong. And even Anton's like, yo, what the hell went down? You weren't supposed to kill her in the explosion. He was like, no, that was her. She transformed and exploded. I just happened to get out of there in time. I don't remember what happened exactly. Playing it down, like, because even he was disgusted by what he was. And he knew that if the others had found out what he was, they would have immediately killed him too. So I will admit, I do like the way his power works. Essentially, his power kind of works on frequencies, kind of close to what Daisy's powers work on. That the fact is that he can basically shift, like build up power, kind of shift his body into a gas and explode. But he can then quickly, obviously, reform himself in the form of a gas and bring himself back each time. So he can constantly go off over and over and over again, without having to die. So it's a very interesting power, and I like the way it works, especially like when we got to see it. Like the fact is that he was going to do it on the jet and everything, but you had Fitz as well as Mace kind of pushing him into the cage box thing. They eject that and it immediately explodes. And so Because initially they were trying to get basically Daisy to use her powers because she can absorb frequencies and stuff like that, which his power works on. So basically the plan is to kind of have her absorb the frequency so he doesn't really explode. But for her, it was basically tiring him out, to basically keep using her powers to kind of wear him out with each explosion. And obviously they were able to trap him and everything. Going back to a big chunk of this episode is basically dealing with Mace, because Mace is trying to figure out his place and everything, because he ends up finding out, because Gemma is like, you can't take these anymore. You can't take those injections anymore because they are slowly but surely killing it. It's not like the chances of you dying increase with every shot you take, because you never know if that next shot's going to be the one to kill you, or the one after that, or the one after that. So, and it's sad because Fitz immediately comes after. He's like, yo, I got your suit ready and everything. The fact of the matter is you don't even have to carry around that suitcase anymore, because now your injections are part of the suit. You just press a button. It's like, oh, they will kill him and everything. It's like, you really should have told me that before I went into this whole spiel and kind of went into my whole big presentation, which kind of sucks, because now Mace is like, because for Mace, he keeps getting pushed down further and further. Like, he was a director, but then he kind of got pushed down as to kind of being almost a nobody, like, kind of, because he kept using football analogies. I'm not well versed in football, so I'm not going to be able to kind of, essentially for him, he was like, oh yeah, I was kind of the star quarterback at first, being the director, but then he kind of got pushed down a different position, especially because it's like Coulson's at the top, kind of being the real director. He's kind of just the face of the operations, but now he's getting pushed down even further because he can't be out in the field, because yeah, he's decently trained and stuff like that, but not to the point of being able to actually be good enough in the field. Like, his training is done a little bit. Like I said, he's slightly trained, but not, it was only supposed to be enough to kind of get him through, because most of it would come through will be because of his super strength. That's where a lot of his, like, where he's lacking in certain areas, like, it would be made up by his super strength. But now without that, he's just kind of a regular Joe Schmo who can't be useful, essentially, in his mind, because he wants to be helpful. It's like, oh, let me do this and do that. It's like, no, we got this. And now he just doesn't know where he fits in the whole equation of everything. So, I mean, he plays his part at the end of the episode when he acts as kind of, he says, like, he found what his role is in his blocker. He injects himself one more time and he keeps the watchdogs at bay. He even, and Anton's there, and he's like, well, the fact is we ain't got to worry about the others, because we have the inhuman leader of the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. capture. It's like, well, obviously they're going to be into a rude awakening when they're finding out next episode, like, oh, he's not actually inhuman. I'm sure, like, him being an inhuman is the only reason why they're keeping him alive, obviously for leverage purposes, but the moment they find out he's a regular human, they might just kill him. I don't know, because they'll probably look at him as like, oh, you pretended to be one of those disgusting things, and then they also find out, like, how he's doing it. Who's to say they won't? Well, no, because the injections are supposed to be meant only for him. But with the whole Superior situation, it's like, maybe he'll find a way, get Radcliffe to re-engineer those devices, the injections, so they can work on him. Because it just seems like with the whole, like, oh, I am the superior, part of the Watchdogs and everything, it feels like he's obviously being set up as the main bad guy. It seems like it's kind of interesting how the main bad guy situation has passed around back and forth, like, throughout this. Obviously, at first you're thinking, like, it was Ida, but then you find out it's Radcliffe, and now you're like, oh, it's Nadir. I mean, which she was always kind of set up being an antagonist, but even more so now. And now it's like, oh, what about Superior? And now Radcliffe, like, especially now that they're working together and everything. It makes you wonder what's going to exactly go down to basically determine, like, how they plan to wipe out all Inhumans is kind of the question. There's a side note thing too I want to include, just as one of those actor things I tend to include in these. The actor who plays Anton, I don't know if it is, but it looks like it's the same actor who plays Rowan, basically the Ice Nation King on the 100. I didn't even realize that until just now. I was like, I kept looking at the episode last week, I'm like, why does he look so familiar? And then subsequently, since seeing the premiere of, the 100 last week, it was kind of like, now I'm seeing this episode, I was like, is that what it is? Maybe it's the same actor, maybe they just look similar, and maybe I'm just completely wrong. I don't know. But like I said, now they got Mace, but we do have Phil knowing that, hey, the fact of the matter is we know that May is definitely alive, so he's got to try and track her down. I mean, all roads lead to the same place. Getting May means also going after Mace. I mean, granted, it'll probably be in different places, but obviously they're all connected and all working together, so. Overall, a very good episode with so many different layers and just so much happening, and just, I don't know, just overall very good episode. It does beg the question too, like, what does this mean for Talbot's project? Because they brought up the fact is that Talbot was just trying to recreate the super soldier project that created Captain America, but obviously not to any success, because there can only, well, I was about to say there can only be one Captain America, but that's not true at all. Comic book wise, I do know that. Not because I've read it, but it's because I've heard it from other people and I've seen other things. It's like, oh yeah. Interesting enough to find out that Sam Wilson, aka Falcon, ends up becoming Captain America. I don't know how that whole situation works, especially because it seems like they coexist at the same time. Like, I know at some point, I think I've brought that up before, so I'm not going to go into it, the whole Steve Rogers situation. I'm not going to go into it like what I was about to go to, so I'm just going to leave it at that, so. I'm very interested to see where we go down next episode with our new developments that have come on. But really, this is all I wanted to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.